consequently, you need a good way to map out or chart out the database, even by hand, even just with pen on paper. And that's where entity relationship diagrams come in. I like to consider ERDs the flow charts of databases, but of course this does have a problem. Databases don't have any flow. They don't have any process associated with them. Yes, you can add code to a database, but that's code secondary from the database itself. The database is just a fixed store of data. So we are not actually recording the flow of any data or the flow of any processing. Instead, our entity relationship diagrams are modeling or are drawing out our entities and their relationship to one another, just like it says ERD. So first, what are the entities? Well, the entity is a single item or a single thing in the database, and it's typically a single table. When we talk about an entity in an entity relationship diagram, we are almost always talking about a table. So for example, the customer table, there's an example that I've used that kind of looks like a list of names and states. Well, we might draw that out like this, and I am physically going to draw it. We would say, all right, this is my customer table. Right? And I'm just going to make a square. That's all it is. That's all the entity in an entity relationship diagram is. It's just a square with the name of the table. And then I indicate the fields. So there's first, and there's last, and there is state here. And I indicate what data is being stored in these fields. So these are all character fields because they all have characters in them. But if there was some kind of numeric column down here, then I would list that and I would write, numeric here or whatever. So that's the entity. That is the table here listed as a square. If we have additional entities inside of our database, we would model them with additional squares. And so on and so forth. So every entity, every table that is going to store data inside of our database can be modeled by drawing out one of these little squares, one of these little entities inside of our ERD. And by the way, the point here is not necessarily to create a perfect future prediction of our database, although a lot of times you are trying to map out a database before you develop it. You may also be trying to map out an existing database, a database that is developed and changed over time. You may need to sit down and get an overall view of it. Well, this is how you start. You start by mapping out the entities themselves, and then you move on to the relationships. And the relationships inside of your database that you consequently want to draw out or model inside of your ERD are how the entities relate to one another. And that's a little bit confusing at first, but here let me try to explain. Imagine my entity, again, this is my customers table. And imagine I have my second entity, which is my orders table. Well, the way these two relate is that one single record inside of my customers entity can well have multiple different records inside of my orders table. And that's because customers can have multiple different orders. Now, an order never has more than one customer. It's only a customer that has multiple orders. So we call this a one-to-many relationship, and we model it out exactly like I just did there with that pitchfork trident looking stick. It's a straight line from customers to three different little ticks here on the orders. That doesn't indicate that there's actually 3 orders for every customer. It just means that there is possibly more than one order for a customer. There may be 0 orders for a customer. Maybe you're just tracking customers inside of your database that haven't ordered anything but only thought about ordering something, in which case you would do something like this. You'd put a little 0 on there, and that says that it's 1 or 0 to many orders. So you can have 1 or 0 or 2 or 3 or however many orders that you have per customer listed in your customer entity. So we are modeling the relationship between the customers table and the entities table. And this can get really crazy really quick. I mean, here I just have customers and orders, right? Well, imagine, we have something like this. Now I've got my customers entity. I have my orders entity, which is nothing more than a customer ID and a date. And then I have my order items entity. This might be a third table. And what has that got? Well, that's got the order number, the quantity, the price, right? And same thing, we've got one to many, because one customer can have many orders, but each order can have many line items on it. So a given order might have multiple different line items. Here, order number 17, which is that very first one, has 1, 2, 3 different items that person ordered inside of that same order. Right? It's like they added 3 items to their shopping cart on the website. So this customers to orders is a 0 to many, but the orders to order items is a 1 to many. And the reason for that is because an order has to have at least one order item, otherwise it's not an order. So here is how we would map out or we would model these entity relationship diagrams. So that's just a very quick example of what a simple ERD might look like. Like I said, they can get complex quickly. This is one that I just searched for on the internet and found. Even this is not an overly complicated ERD. This is a pretty typical relationship diagram for a database that you might find in a production system. systems. So yeah, they can get really crazy, but they are very, very helpful in when it comes to understanding your database. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.